from the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. Ramping Up Your English is for English language learners from all language backgrounds who have already begun the process of learning English as their second language. It's a program for people of all ages. If you're seeking greater English proficiency, this program is designed to help you reach that goal. Ramping Up Your English is a support program for English learners who have already passed the beginning stages of learning English. We take a content-based approach to helping you reach higher English proficiency. We use English to teach English. The theme of our first unit is Trains and Railroads. This is episode 24, segment 1. In our last episode, we traveled from Washington, D.C. aboard Amtrak's Cardinal train toward Chicago. In part 3, we arrive in Chicago after enjoying some beautiful scenery. You can watch part 3 on my website, letscreate.org. You can also find it on episode 24 page at that website, letscreate.org. In today's episode, we'll change trains and head further west. And if you have never been west of the Mississippi River in the United States, imagine yourself on the California Zephyr. You've seen mountains and forests and fields in the east, but that has not prepared you for the landscape you'll encounter on the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains. Let's call an all aboard for the westbound California Zephyr.
Pulling out of Chicago's Union Station, Amtrak's California Zephyr leaves one of America's largest cities to cross its widest empty spaces to end in San Francisco 3 days later. Imagine the excitement of someone who's never seen the West, anticipating the adventure and the unique landscape that lies ahead. It's this romance with the West that gave birth to the California Zephyr, a premier train running on the tracks of 3 different railroads. We see another Amtrak train waiting at an old Chicago warehouse, reminding us that Chicago is the hub from which nearly all the long-distance trains depart. We cross the Chicago River and encounter factories that once made Chicago the second largest city in the United States. I'm reminded that Chicago got its start as a meatpacking center, later expanding into other industries. Parallel bridges cross streets and rails as we leave the city behind and enter the countryside on the way to Omaha, Nebraska. Soon we cross the Mississippi River. Even this far north, the Mississippi is wide. The historic California Zephyr was operated here by the railroad that would become the Burlington Northern, the first of 3 to proudly carry the California Zephyr. For the traveler exploring the West, the Mississippi River is a boundary between the industrial settled East and the great beyond. Now we speed through the flat Great Plains of Iowa and Nebraska. This was a section of the Transcontinental Railroad where the Union Pacific set and broke world records of laying rails toward the West Coast, receiving a square mile of land for every mile of track constructed. The Union Pacific kept the route as straight as possible, competing with the Central Pacific Railroad to build the greatest length of track. The California Zephyr took a different route, heading for Denver, where the Rio Grande Railroad would take the California Zephyr through its Rocky Mountain wonderland. The first light of day greets the California Zephyr at Denver. This is where the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad took the Zephyr through its second section. Denver is the largest city in the region. Its humble beginnings of a few ranches was quickly eclipsed by the silver and other hard rock mining in the area. This activity gave Denver and the railroad its birth. The Rio Grande Railroad built its Rocky Mountain empire to compete with Union Pacific and Southern Pacific for freight and passenger traffic to the West Coast. The California Zephyr dips deep into southern Utah, then back north to Salt Lake City. Pulling out of Denver, we climb steadily, rising above the Great Plains and approaching the Rocky Mountains. For those traveling west for the first time, the familiar views of home are a thing of the past. Those expecting rugged country and uncrowded spaces are not disappointed. The California Zephyr has already taken them into the west. Here we enter one of many tunnels along the route. Soon, westbound passengers find themselves at the roof of North America. This snow-dusted wonderland features the Colorado River, not far from its headwaters in Rocky Mountain National Park. The Colorado River will now be the Zephyr's companion through numerous scenic canyons. Looking out through the large viewing car windows, many of the iconic Old West scenes present themselves, and the imagination is free to wander through this still wild country. From the privacy of a roomette in the sleeping car, this jaw-dropping scenery can be enjoyed in quiet. There are many areas of the train where passengers can get a great view of the scenery. This view is from the dining car. The coach has large windows. The viewing car has wraparound windows near the ceiling, where passengers can look up and see the many cliffs and gorge walls along this route. Across the river, we see a section of Interstate 70, one of the last major parts of the interstate system to be completed. Like the railroad, the highway depends on tunnels to carry traffic through this mountainous country. There's something about these soaring, craggy walls that sets my imagination on fire. I'm not alone in this. The California Zephyr's schedule is timed to pass here and during the daylight. Where else can you see a sight like this while deciding what to eat for lunch?
Okay. I wasn't sure if you knew what you wanted.
I think I'll get the Angus burger again.
I was thinking about having a burger too.
Do you work for Amtrak?
No, I'm a big fan though.
Oh, you are?
As you can tell.
Yeah.
The California Zephyr continues to follow the Colorado River, arriving in Glenwood Springs in Part 2 of the California Zephyr Westbound.
Welcome back to Ramping
Pulling
Up
out
Your
of
English,
Chicago's
a
Union
support
Station,
program for intermediate
Amtrak's
level English learners who want to improve their English proficiency. If that's you, you're in the right place. The California Zephyr is an example of a long-distance train. Passengers spend 3 days on the train to cross this great western landscape. While such a trip opens up a scenic utopia, there's an aspect of endurance in being dependent on the train services for all this time in transit. One aspect of long-distance train travel that makes the trip so enjoyable are the fresh prepared meals for sale in the dining car. The large seats in the coach and the freedom to move about the train made these trips great experiences for me, with occasional trips to the dining car for a special meal. Now, I'm more likely to rent a roomette in a sleeping car for a multi-day trip like this. The price of the sleeper includes meals in the diner. Long-distance trains throughout the world offer food in a dining car, And it's typical for any railroad to lose money on the meals they serve. In other words, the food in the diner costs more to prepare than the price charged on the menu. Yet railroads continue to provide dining cars because, well, that's what helps get people on the train, helps attract travelers to spend several days on the long-distance train. Now, some members of the U.S. Congress are well aware of how dining car expenses work on long-distance trains, yet they pass legislation that demands that Amtrak make a profit on meals on these trains. Now, they are doing the bidding of certain billionaires who want to eliminate Amtrak. They know that if they can devalue the meals, fewer passengers will take the long-distance trains. And if the long-distance trains, like the California Zephyr we just saw, can be eliminated, the system of rail travel in the United States will fall apart. When we return, we'll use this example to write a persuasive letter in English. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. Reading a book about an instructional theme can make English more comprehensible. Seeing a movie based on that book can do even more to develop tools for English proficiency. If you want to have fun doing this, and I suggest making English learning as fun as possible, read Polar Express, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. This Caldecott Award winner takes readers on a wild fantasy train ride to the North Pole using much of the lore of American railroads. The story begins in Grand Rapids, Michigan in the 1950s. The plot begins when a boy awakes on Christmas Eve to see a train called the Polar Express. The conductor invites him aboard, and the adventure begins. I suggest reading the book first. It has beautiful illustrations that will provide many context clues for the readers. Then rent the movie to see how the story is treated, and of course to see the awesome special effects. A fun way of supporting your English acquisition is to read Polar Express. At the least, it'll be a fun experience, and you'll think of it every time you drink hot chocolate. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. Our goal is to help you elevate your level of English proficiency in a way that causes the least amount of stress. Our approach is to make English language learning interesting and fun by using a thematic approach. Our first theme is trains and railroads. We're going to ride the California Zephyr Westbound again, but first let's learn how to write a persuasive letter in English. We'll use the situation we explored before the break as our example. Our letter will be to a member of Congress urging them to support long-distance train travel in the United States. Now, persuasive language differs from expressing an opinion. You're actually trying to get someone to do something. In this case, let's assume the letter is going to the congressman that represents the district in which you live. The first step is to tell him or her briefly what you want them to do. So let's start with this sentence. I'm writing to urge your support for Amtrak's long-distance trains. Now, let's list 3 reasons why they should do that. These reasons should be based on facts that can be verified by the representative or their staff. Long-distance trains are the only transportation available for people in some of the towns they serve. Long-distance trains are increasingly popular with the public, and long-distance trains are essential to maintaining a true network of rail transportation in the United States. Now, we'll take each of these facts and add details to each one. Among America's aging population, an increasing number of people are unable to fly or drive long distances. Like those who live in smaller cities that have lost air connections, they rely on Amtrak's long-distance trains to travel. Disconnecting rail service would leave this growing population isolated from their families and from critical services. Now, let's add detail to the second part. Over the past decade, ridership on Amtrak's long-distance trains has increased. This trend is likely to continue with more and more people discovering the comfortable and low-stress service that the long-distance trains provide. Now, let's add detail to the third point. The cities and towns of the West are essential to maintaining a viable rail transportation system. Without service to these population centers, the remaining system would dwindle. The rail system in the United States was expanded to the West Coast to bind the country together. We need to continue these passenger trains to safeguard this unity. Now we need to repeat what we want this representative to do, but in a different way than our letter opening, linking this desire to the reasons we just explained. Your support is needed to continue Amtrak's long-distance service. Your opposition to schemes that seek to discontinue Amtrak's long-distance trains, like insisting that Amtrak not lose money on dining car service, will be critical to saving these essential trains. It's equally important that Amtrak receives sufficient funding for their operation. An increasing number of rail passengers in our district are counting on you to stand firm for our long-distance trains. Now let's look at some of the words we use that indicate that this is a persuasive letter. I urge you to. Now, urge is a strong word. It's not rude or bossy, but it carries the expectation that you want them to act. You're not wishing or hoping or suggesting. You're not saying, we think you were thinking maybe you might act. No, urge is derived from the word urgent. It's the word you want. Only transportation available. These words indicate that you're not trying to preserve a luxury or a privilege. You're saying this is important. Increasingly popular. Not only will they want to be on the right side of a trend, but these words negate the outdated argument that no one rides these trains. It's also a point that's easily established with facts. Long-distance trains are essential. The word essential goes beyond saying they're important. The word essential implies that the rail network cannot exist without the long-distance trains. Viable. The word viable means workable or functionable. It demonstrates a level of sophistication and even nuance. Some measure of service might survive the absence of long-distance trains, but it would not really function in a meaningful way. Closing the letter by thanking the representative for his or her consideration is simply a courtesy, but doing so adds to the status accorded to the writer. Now, you can add facts directly to the 3 points you made in the body of the letter, or you can footnote them to references. A great place to get facts about passenger trains and the issues involved is a website of the National Association of Railroad Passengers. Visit nap.org for information. That's NARP, nap.org. They are a respected organization, and they're always careful to check out their facts before posting them. I have a link to their website on my website, letscreate.org. Now, if you feel unprepared to write a persuasive letter on your own, consider this lesson an exposure to a process. We'll go into greater details in future programs. If you decide that you will write a letter and send a persuasive letter to your congressman or senator, you can find the mailing address online and in front of some phone directories, as well as the editorial page of your local newspaper. For now, let's journey on one of those trains we're working to save. Here's part 2 of our journey westward on the California Zephyr.
After hours of drop-dead scenery, the California Zephyr arrives in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Glenwood Springs is the gateway to the ski area of Vail. It's a good place to get off and spend a night or two. After a brief look downstream, my wife and I crossed over Interstate 70 and the river to our hotel. Glenwood Springs is named for the naturally occurring hot springs here. Our hotel, the Hotel Colorado, is very much a part of today's hot springs experience, providing spacious pools for guests to soak in the hot spring water, plus a water slide for those wanting a little more action. The Hotel Colorado is one of those grand hotels with years of serving guests, so I was surprised that they offered rooms affordable to working people like us. We even saw a quilt commemorating its 100th anniversary. But we didn't spend much of our time in the hotel. There's too much to do outside, so we explored a bit of the Roaring Fork River Trail, the Colorado River, and the railroad itself. The Roaring Forks River has trails where the Rio Grande Railroad used to connect. The Colorado River hosted life for us to enjoy, and the railroad featured a small switching yard. From here, we saw this coal train rumble through town. Crossing the west, I was astounded by how much coal is being mined and shipped around the country. In 2008, the merger of Union Pacific and Southern Pacific was still evident. The Southern Pacific's bloody nose locomotive with Union Pacific lettering. During our 2008 trip, this was the first freight train to emerge from Glenwood Canyon, where a landslide had stopped the train that would have carried us west. This landslide gave us another day in Glenwood Springs. The waiting room at the station was practically deserted as we waited for hours for our train to get through and pick us up. Then it filled with eastbound passengers who couldn't go any further.
What's that? Pretty good, I think.
We booked on the next day's train and got a decent night's sleep across from the station at this hotel. The following day, the eastbound California Zephyr pulled in and waited, but then went through, much to our relief. Next came the announcement we were waiting for.
As you leave the station, please look around, make sure you have all of your personal belongings. And for your safety, please remain well behind the yellow line until the train comes to a complete stop.
And here it came, the westbound California Zephyr. We joined the horde of stranded passengers boarding for the trip west.
Folks, you need to talk to me right here.
We looked out at the small city we enjoyed, but glad to be on our way.
Crossing the Roaring Fork River. They call this the Roaring Fork River Valley. This is el Rio Colorado. This is the Colorado River.
Here we learned that the horizontal band without snow on these mountains is where a fire burns uncontrolled in a coal mine. If our first-time traveler to the West wanted to see a ranch, well, here's one of many Colorado ranches to be seen from the train. If someone wanted to get a good sight of the West, they would probably feel more than happy with what the California Zephyr has shown them. But wait, there's even more great scenery ahead.
Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. Our lesson on writing a persuasive letter can be found at my website, letscreate.org. You'll find today's program there as well as the clips we used. You can watch or even download today's program from archive.org/details/rogue-tv. You can watch Ramping Up Your English on Channel 15 on the Ashland Home Network and on Channel 182 on Charter Cable in Southern Oregon. Visit RVTV's website for more details on channels and showtimes and to stream the program. I want to thank my volunteer crew, my announcer Bob Ayers. I want to thank RVTV, and I want to thank you, our viewers. See you next time on Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/rogue-tv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.